Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about the new album from The Orb, Buddhist Hipsters. Alright, I guess it's time to talk about The Orb again. Here they are with their 17th full-length studio album. And I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty worried about this one. I don't think I need to bother recapping my full history with this band. I've already covered them in a lengthy discography review with videos on all their other old albums. Link to the playlist of those is in the description. Though obviously I've been a huge fan of theirs since I was in high school. They are a band whose work is extremely formative to my tastes, and they've released several albums which have been all-time favorites of mine for a long time, like Adventures Beyond the Ultraworld, UF4, Orbis Terrarum, even more divisive records of theirs like Cydonia, and especially The Dream. Though in terms of their more recent history, this current era of the band, mainly driven by the collaboration between Alex Patterson and Michael Rindall, has been a bit of a mixed bag with some very high highs and quite a few questionable lows. Rindall first became a regular fixture of the band on their 2018 album No Sounds Are Out of Bounds, which was excellent. Still one of my favorite Orb albums overall, and a constantly exciting combination of all the sounds of their previous eras, with one kind of weird meme shitpost track in the middle, but still, great album all the way through. Then their 2020 album, Abolition of the Royal Familia, initially came off to me as even more of what I enjoyed the most in that last album, with some legit great moments, especially at the very beginning of the album with that opening 3-track run. Although the longer I sat with it, I felt like the bulk of the album was merely pretty good or decent and not great. The overall structuring and pacing was pretty lopsided and sluggish. There were elements of it where I was starting to more easily see where some of the people who view the poppier and goofier side of the Orb sound to be annoying and or corny were coming from. And the album also just wasn't nearly as political as the title or cover would have you believe. Outside of the closing track, which actually somehow feels way more prescient now than it did in the pandemic. Album was enjoyable, but kind of a mess. I go back and forth with how much I actually enjoy that one all the time. But a few years later, we then got Prism, an album which, upon its release, I initially saw as a step up from Abolition on the merit of its better structuring and pacing. But aside from its strong opening track, it soured on me even more over time, and as I felt like the ideas going into it were getting progressively more uninspired and corny, and Dr. Alex's usual sample interjections were starting to feel more and more like on the nose and obvious. See my recent video on 10 more albums I changed my mind on for more details on my feelings there. And the time since Prism has also been even more questionable feeling. First of all, one of the best tracks on Prism, Living in Recycled Times, apparently had the performance from its vocal guest Rachel Darcy removed on streaming services due to some kind of dispute with that artist behind the scenes. I'm not sure what happened there, and I kind of suspect I'm better off not knowing. It did not seem like a great look in any case. But even worse than that, in the time since then, on their official YouTube channel, they'd started to embrace more and more AI-generated content. 2 tracks from Prism got AI-generated visualizer videos from Emma Catnip, which might have been neat for, like, a now-dated one-off novelty at the time, kinda like Plaid's Fjorm Falorx was. But they also made it clear this was not going to be a one-off thing when they uploaded new, entirely AI-generated videos for new versions of their old tracks, Spanish Castles in Space and Perpetual Dawn. And this really came to a head when they dropped the lead single of this latest album, a track called Arabebonics. Setting aside the also AI-generated visuals in the video that the guy who made the video is acting really defensive about in that video's comments, replying to people saying things like, "Oh, I used AI and a lot of traditional hard work." Okay, dude. But anyway, this track featured a guest vocal performance from Ro Malone, R-R-O-M-E, a rapper who currently resides on death row and had recorded a verse for them through a payphone. Though, instead of just using the payphone quality audio, they instead tried to restore the audio quality through, in their words, recreating it with AI. Yeah, we're going to have to wade into this fucking discourse again. Strap in for a bit of a semi-lengthy rant. I've previously gone through my complicated feelings on the existence of, large language models and diffusion models, and people's bad arguments against their use rooted in weirdly conservative pro-copyright sentiment or fallacies about artistic value being dependent on the amount of labor that goes into it, which, as someone who is still very pro-sampling and believes copyright law has done way more to hinder creativity than protect artists, I still have to fundamentally disagree with. But in 2025, using these sorts of AI tools doesn't really carry the same meaning it did even as recently as 2 years ago. And I really don't have much defense for the ways the Orb have been using it lately. The way they've been doing AI stuff comes across both like a cost and effort cutting measure, as if they want something cool looking for a video within a limited budget and don't really care what exactly that is, as well as out of what seems like a genuinely held belief that AI is still totally the future and cutting edge technology that makes them look ahead of the curve. And with all due respect, it does not. Right now, AI art only makes you look cool to, finance weirdos and tech bro types with something to gain out of its hype, and people who either don't know or don't care about the insane amount of invasive data harvesting, labor exploitation, and rapid destruction of natural resources required for those tools to exist. To the rest of us, it looks out of touch and gross. The way I see it, AI is only the future insofar as large corporations are literally forcing it to be the future whether anyone likes it or not, and shoving it in everyone's faces in an attempt to make up for all their sunk cost or prevent the bubble from bursting. There might have been promising use cases for it at one time, honestly, including for the kinds of algorithmically generated visuals they've been pushing on their YouTube channel and elsewhere, which I'm kind of pissed that the reputation of algorithmically generated art has been so thoroughly ruined. I do think cool and ethically sourced stuff can be done in that space without corporate backing, but these kinds of visuals are now, too inextricably associated with the current corporate visions to destroy the world in the name of profit to be able to look at in any other way. Not to mention the tools themselves, in getting more advanced, have paradoxically only gotten less useful in creative contexts, as corporations have pigeonholed them into all the most unethical use cases. And while I used to at least be fine with regular people using these kinds of tools, since I felt like the corporations doing all the exploitation to make those kinds of tools available were the real enemy, at this point, using AI tools in your art at best comes off, super cynical and like you don't actually give that much of a shit about the art you're making. And at worst, looks like a tacit endorsement of the ongoing corporate vision to destroy everything in the name of profit and prop up fascist regimes to get there. This shit is about as cool as selling NFTs was a few years ago. Not quite as bad as that, since it doesn't involve literally conning your own fans out of their money, but, comparably respectable. And I think it might look cooler to more people if they just fucking stopped with this shit. I may not have liked their music video for the track Days, but that wasn't trying to pass itself off as anything other than the lame Facebook dad shitpost that it was. And even when you set aside any kinds of arguments about the ethics and/or optics of using AI tools, Arabebonics is just not a very good track to begin with. Some might look at it and say, well, the use of AI in the song was just for audio restoration on the vocals, right? That's kind of like what the Beatles did for Now and Then a few years ago, and most of us were totally on board for that. And I do include myself in that, I still like that track. But obviously the Orb are not the Beatles. They were never going to have the budget to have people develop more ethically sourced algorithms specifically for the purpose of restoring this one guy's voice. So I strongly suspect they just used some cheap off-the-shelf corporate-backed tools for this. And in doing so, if anything, they just made the guy's voice sound worse. Maybe it's technically more full-sounding, frequency-wise, but they made it sound like he's rapping through, laryngitis with some weird digital artifacts. And none of it actually makes him more intelligible than he would have sounded otherwise. For the record, I've sampled through some of Ro Malone's solo music where he raps through a payphone, and I legit think just using the payphone audio quality would have not only sounded better, but also been a perfectly good fit for the Orb's style. Would have made him sound kind of like one of Dr. Alex's random sample interjections. Maybe felt like an extremely loose mirror to the intro of Towers of Dub. That would have been cool, and possibly even inspired more people to look into Romalone's story and his other work to find out why he had to rap through a payphone. Using the AI filter just made him sound bad in a much less specific way that I think is less likely to pique people's curiosity like that. And let's also be real, it's not like this track would have exactly been a masterpiece without the AI filter. While I do quite like Violetta Vici's string performances and background vocals, and her contribution single-handedly prevents the track from being completely unpalatable for me. I mean, the beats underneath sound like they were thrown together with like 2 or 3 stock GarageBand loops, bringing in all the production quality of the work I made in my school's computer classes when I was a 12-year-old. And even if the title is less problematic than it sounds coming out of the Orb, since Romalone is Muslim and he's the one who came up with it, I mean, I don't really feel like the idea is as clever as Patterson and Rendell seem to think it is. And it's not like the verses have like a ton of cool substance to them beyond the base sentiment of, I'm cool and the way I talk is cool. Sure, the AI filter alone made the track way more actively painful to sit through, and the fact that it's here at all feels like a cheap attempt to jump on a bandwagon, but if that filter wasn't there, the track would just be fine. It'd be like mildly interesting to see them try a hip-hop thing again, and with good string backing, but not exactly delivering anything mind-blowing otherwise. Back when the track came out, I even saw one of my commenters suspect that the whole track was entirely AI generated, and while I obviously do not believe that's true, I think it's just the vocals and nothing else. I mean, I wouldn't be able to blame anyone for getting that impression, unfortunately. When the track first dropped and I heard the way the vocals sounded without knowing any details on how the track was made, that alone had me questioning myself about the whole thing. You add even one little bit of AI-assisted material and it'll make everything look more suspect by association. Yeah, I can't mince words. Arabebonics is just kinda bad. I think there might even be a case for it possibly being the worst track the Orb have ever made. And while there is a decent bit of competition for that spot, that should still be saying something. And the fact that this was chosen as the album's lead single is absolutely fucking insane to me. So yeah, that was about as bad of a first impression as you could get, and it left a bad enough taste in my mouth that I barely even sampled through the other 2 pre-album singles, Under the Bed and It's Coming Soon, when either of them dropped. They didn't sound even close to as bad as Arabebonics, and were kind of more stuff in the same vein as what they were already doing before on the ambient and techno-y parts of Abolition and Prism. But they didn't grab me that much on their own, and all of that had me going into Buddhist Hipsters with a serious sense of dread. I was kind of going into this album half expecting to be decrying it as their worst album to date. So, I think you can imagine my surprise when it turned out that the rest of this album was actually really good. In fact, if one were to remove the lead single from the track listing, then this would have quite easily been their best album since No Sounds Are Out of Bounds. And even with that one clunker there, I think this album as a complete whole is about on par with Abolition, and maybe even a little better if I'm being generous. Now, for the record, I am writing this review under the assumption that there were no other AI-generated elements included on this album aside from that vocal filter on Arabebonics. The rest of the album, aside from that track, sounds just like the stuff they were already doing on their last 2 albums before the proliferation of AI got to the ridiculous extent we're at now. It's all more spacey ambient techno and disco, or regular spacey ambience, with all the same bright and colorful if fairly standard textures they were using before, and with Dr. Alex's usual occasional sample interjections. If it ever gets revealed later that they used AI for anything else on the album, you can deduct a full point from my final score for each instance of that, and probably drop it to the bottom of my ranking of their albums. But I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt and assuming that everything else is just synthesizers and samples like usual, since that's exactly what it sounds like to me. And with that in mind, Buddhist Hipsters is an album that primarily focuses on all the elements of their last 2 albums that I enjoyed the most, and even refreshingly leans away from the elements of their last 2 albums that annoyed me the most. Dr. Alex's random spoken samples finally got better again. They've still got the quirky imaginative edge to them that I come to the Orb for, but they don't feel like they were chosen quite as mindlessly this time or feature any of the eye-roll-inducing, super obvious on-the-nose drug or meme references. So I'm much happier with that aspect of it. And the instrumentals, for the most part, remind me the most of the spacey techno and disco jams they were exploring on their last two albums, like House of Narcotics, Hawk Kings, and High Orbs Mini Earths. All the cuts from those albums that have most consistently held up the best for me, even as my feelings on those albums shifted around over time. Not to mention, I feel like this is probably the best of the Michael Rendell era albums from like an overall flow, cohesion, and sequencing standpoint as well. When Alex's quote in the Bandcamp description compared the album to UF4, I initially just rolled my eyes and took it with a grain of salt. But I can kind of vaguely see where he's coming from hearing the full album now. I mean, the arc is kind of more in reverse, since UF4 starts with its most ambient moment and ends in more dance-centric territory, and this album's the other way around. But I see the parallels in terms of the style and sound and overall sense of flow. Although there's also some mild mirrors to their first album as well, like how the album's opener, Spontaneously Combust, our usual collab with System 7 and Youth, seems like a fairly direct attempt to recreate some of the magic of Little Fluffy Clouds. More specifically, like the larger scale live versions of Little Fluffy Clouds, not the 4-minute album version. This track is 10 minutes long and makes that time seem to zip by. It builds from lots of expansive ambience with Steve Hillage's guitar soloing in the background, into thicker dance beats, heavy dub bass lines from Youth, a bunch of kalimbas as melodic textures, which is really nice, and of course a bunch of vocal samples of a woman describing a painting like being hosed down and the paint dripping and running down and mixing up all the colors and stuff, in almost the exact same tone of voice as Rickie Lee Jones describing what the skies were like when she was young. I kinda don't think that's actually Rickie Lee Jones again, since if I recall correctly, she threatened legal action over the last time they used her voice. But, you know, I'll take the blatant fan service anyway. This track seems to be pretty clearly singled out as the big fan favorite on the album so far, and I can definitely see why. It's one of my easy favorites too. Although the next two tracks are about equally on par with it in my mind. Following track, P1, both slows down the tempo but also cranks up the energy with more intense synth riffs and hip-hop beats, which get pretty epic, alongside samples of people describing UFO sightings. This kind of reminds me of something that would have come out in, like, the Orblivion era, and that's pretty neat. Although the next track, Baraka, might even be, like, a little better for me, combining samples of some kind of, like, black church preacher, both singing and delivering, like, a sermon about Satan or whatever, with all these swirling orchestral samples and big, spacey, propulsive techno mixes, with lots of bubbly synths that carry a lot of forward momentum. That's definitely my shit. Next, we get our standard Orb reggae track, A Sacred Choice, featuring another vocal performance from Eric Von Skywalker, previously known as The Corporal. And yeah, it's a good catchy tune, well produced and lively, maybe not the densest of their sound design, or hits as mind-expanding a note for me as other Orb tracks with the same vocalist, such as Mother Nature or Lost and Found. But, you know, it's got the same appeal. Perhaps it's kind of like if A Ghetto Love Story from the previous album wasn't so insufferably schmaltzy and thereby made actually good. I don't expect this the kind of track that's going to appeal to everyone as per usual, but it's not an Orb album without some dub and reggae influence. And this is probably the best tune of theirs in this specific vein since, I don't know, Rush Hill Road? I fuck with it. Alright, I can mostly skip over Arabebonics, which I think I've given more than enough time talking about. I will say, at least sequencing-wise, it is in the spot of the album where it would have made the most sense to put it, and there were a few listens where it flowed well enough out of some of the sounds of A Sacred Choice where I didn't even notice anything was up until those stock guitar loops started showing up. Although the sound of that track is so different from everything else here that it's quite easy to just take out. And honestly, the album flows even better if you just skip over it altogether and move right into the next track, It's Coming Soon. Now, It's Coming Soon is a nice track. This is our standard appearance from vocalist Andy Kane as he sings over a fairly standard 90s acid techno jam and gives it all his usual more soulful edge with a decently memorable hook. Although he doesn't exactly, like, knock it out of the park either. The track's just pretty good and kind of blends in the background for me for the most part. Which is maybe kinda odd considering the Andy Kane appearances on other old Orb albums have typically been much bigger highlights for me than this. I mean, I wasn't necessarily expecting him to kill it on the level of his performance on Soul Planet, but tracks like Days, Dirty Disco Dub, even Tiger from the last album, all those have much stronger catchy tunes I really like, and this track's tune is just pretty good, not amazing or anything. Although not annoying either, to be fair. Given Kane's performance is much more understated here and the hook isn't quite as much of an incessant earworm as some of those other tracks, I would get it if other people were more drawn to this than I was. I guess if you were to take Arabebonics out, this might probably end up being my least favorite pick instead, but unlike that track, I would not actively want this one removed. At this point in the album, I'm typically just kind of getting lost in the spacey techno vibes, and this still delivers them as well as anything else here. Which is also the way I feel about the next track, Doll's House, that carries off the exact same ambient techno sound, although I do definitely prefer this track over It's Coming Soon. The bass lines feel deeper and more propulsive, there's just more of a sense of energy to the whole mix, the deep-voiced announcer voices calling for peace and love and joy give the whole track like a kind of like a psytrance adjacent vibe, which I fuck with too. Maybe not among the album's most memorable moments, especially with it blending pretty seamlessly into its two surrounding tracks, but again, I enjoy myself anytime it comes on. And that leads into the Oort Cloud 2 Night, which is quite handily the best out of this little trilogy of ambient techno jams. They brought in Dennis Ward, aka Dr. D, on co-production here. I think that guy also co-produced the track Catskills on The Dream. And they also brought in the 80s pop and reggae vocalist Trevor Walters for a guest performance. Or maybe that's a sample, I don't know. But either way, this ends up being like a really fun and energetic cut with a lot of like early 90s house influence. It pretty much delivers the same idea as what It's Coming Soon did 2 tracks earlier, but bringing more of the energy I felt was comparatively kinda missing. So yeah, that track slaps, definitely one of my bigger favorites on this thing. But that takes us to the album's ending. Under the Bed is a completely ambient track which stretches on for just under 10 minutes and floats between a lot of thick emotional synth and string drones, and a brief stretch more driven by some light synth arpeggios. Also, this one's a crossover with Andy Falconer, so it's kind of a Sedibus track in spirit as well. Shout out to him. I will admit that when this was dropped as a single, I quickly sampled through a couple small parts of it and didn't really think much of it. This had me thinking back to the title track of Prism, which I also think is nice and pleasant but not memorable. And I wouldn't put this among my favorite tracks on the album either, mostly out of personally finding the more dance-centric stuff to be more personally investing. Which, funny enough, by process of elimination, that does mean the Orb just so happened to pick my 3 least favorite tracks off of this album as the pre-album singles. Man, did this album have a questionable rollout, Jesus. But I will say that Under the Bed is my favorite of the 3 pre-album singles. I think hearing it in fuller album context made a difference, as its placement in the beginning of this little come-down section at the end after all these more dance-centric cuts allowed it to hit better for what it was going for. Obviously, it doesn't hit me on, Into the Fourth Dimension or even Unknowable levels, but it does hit on a similar note to something like Afterlife Aftershave on the first Sedibus record. Or actually also kind of reminds me of certain parts of, Tangerine Dream's Realm as well. So, yeah, very nice track. Might have also been a bigger favorite if it weren't also immediately topped by the album's closer, Khàron, which goes for the exact same lonely and expansive ambient tone as Under the Bed, but gets even larger scale at over 12 minutes. Features Roger Eno playing some light piano around all the edges. Also features its own, Tangerine Dream-inspired section that gives its synth arpeggios more, definition and presence than the similar section of the previous track, as if that were just a prelude and this was what it was really leading up to. And also the pads in the background of this track sometimes sound like they're, calling back to a huge ever-growing pulsating brain as well, so there's another Adventures Beyond the Ultraworld reference to bring the whole experience full circle. So yeah, for as awful a first impression as this album made with its lead single, now that the full thing is out, I do have to say I was pleasantly surprised by the whole thing. It's a good album. I cannot overlook the one skip, which only got worse the longer I thought about it, but the fact that an album with a light 3 out of 10 track like that on it still turned out to be pretty good in spite of it, I think has to be a testament to something. If I were to place this album in my Orb album ranking, I think it sits around the same place as Abolition of the Royal Familia. I have a comparable level of frustration, except there was a whole bunch of different problems coalescing together, and here it's all concentrated on just one specific choice that made me want to scream at them. And if you put that aside, there's shockingly very little for me to complain about here. And the fact that the rest of the album turned out to even kind of like seem to directly address a lot of my problems with their last two albums kind of has me leaning more towards ranking this one higher than Abolition. They're still near tied though, and I don't have any frustrations like these towards Chill Out World, so that still sits above it. But if Arabebonics were taken out, or even if that track simply had the AI-assisted crap replaced with Romalone's payphone audio, this probably would have sit around the same spot in the ranking that I used to have Prism at when that album first came out. Above Okie Dokie The Orban Compact and below Metallic Spheres. It's a really nice time, and they surprisingly managed to keep any other cringiness to a minimum. At the end of the day, Buddhist Hipsters is not exactly the kind of thing I would see myself like dying on a hill for, or holding up as some kind of like absolute must listen. You're not going to hear anything on this album that you haven't already heard out of the Orb in the last couple of years, and if you were still more of a fan of Thomas Fellman's tenure in the band, you're still probably going to be feeling his absence here too. And who knows, perhaps it's possible my feelings on this one end up switching as well, like my feelings on their last two did. But I'm feeling hopeful that that won't happen, because like this was like an album that I went in half expecting to be a complete train wreck, and thank God it was not that. I ended up enjoying my time with the results a lot more than I thought I was going to. I just got swept up in all the well-crafted spacey dance beats and ambience, and came out on the other end with my respect for the Orb miraculously intact, so I think that means at least something. They really had me worried, but I came out breathing a sigh of relief. But it would still be really nice if they would cut out the AI stuff going forward. So yeah, on Buddhist Hipsters, I think I got enough out of this to let it off with a solid 7 out of 10. But of course, this is all just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.
The two of us, we're feeling alright.